Hi, I'm Chloe. Last Tuesday morning, my mother called my supervisor at Northwest Mental Health Services and told her I was showing up to work high on methamphetamines. She said I was stealing from clients, hallucinating during therapy sessions, and that the family was concerned about my erratic behavior. She begged Dr. Valdez to drug test me immediately before I hurt someone. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Because what my parents didn't know was that 3 months earlier, my grandmother had left me something in her will that would make their little performance the most expensive phone call of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain was coming down hard against the windows of my small apartment on Southeast Division that morning. I'd been up since 5, reviewing case files for my afternoon group therapy session at the clinic. The coffee was still warm in my hands when my phone started buzzing with texts from coworkers. Strange messages. Concerned messages. Lisa Chen, my closest friend at work, sent me a photo of Dr. Valdez's office door with a note that simply said, "Emergency meeting. They're asking about you." I didn't panic. That's not who I am. I've always been the steady one, the reliable one, the daughter who never caused problems. Even as a kid, while my older brother Bradley was getting arrested for drunk driving, and my parents were covering up his messes, I was tutoring other students and volunteering at the animal shelter. I graduated summa cum laude from Portland State with my master's in clinical psychology. I'd been working at Northwest Mental Health Services for 4 years, helping people overcome addiction and trauma. My client satisfaction scores were consistently in the top 5%. So when Lisa's text came through, I knew something was very wrong, but I also knew it wasn't anything I had done. I threw on my rain jacket and drove through the gray Portland morning to the clinic. The building sat nestled between a vintage bookstore and a kombucha brewery, typical for the Pearl District. Everything looked normal from the outside. Clients were arriving for their morning appointments. The parking lot was full, and the large windows glowed with warm light against the overcast sky. But the moment I walked through the front doors, I could feel the shift in energy. Tanya Rodriguez from Human Resources was standing by the reception desk, clipboard in hand, wearing the kind of expression people reserve for delivering bad news. She spotted me immediately and walked over with measured steps, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. "Chloe," she said quietly, "Dr. Valdez needs to see you right away." I followed her down the hallway I'd walked hundreds of times before, past the group therapy rooms where I'd facilitated countless sessions, past the art therapy studio where clients painted their way through recovery, past my own office where a spider plant I'd nursed for 3 years sat thriving on the windowsill. Everything felt familiar, yet suddenly foreign, like looking at your childhood home through different eyes. Dr. Patricia Valdez was waiting in her office, hands folded on her desk. She was a woman I'd always respected, someone who'd mentored me through difficult cases and supported my professional development. Her office walls were covered with certificates and photos from community events, and normally she greeted everyone with a warm smile. Today, her expression was carefully neutral. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I sat, placing my hands calmly in my lap. Through the window behind her, I could see the Portland skyline stretching toward the mountains, Mount Hood barely visible through the clouds. "Chloe, I received a very concerning phone call this morning from someone claiming to be your mother," Dr. Valdez began, her voice measured and professional. "She expressed serious concerns about your mental state and alleged substance use." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression steady. "What exactly did she say?" Dr. Valdez consulted a notepad on her desk. "She claimed you've been using methamphetamines, that you've been showing signs of paranoia and erratic behavior at home, and that she's witnessed you hallucinating. She also suggested you might be stealing money from clients or the clinic to fund a drug habit." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I could hear the coffee machine humming in the break room down the hall, the muffled sound of a therapy session in progress next door, the normal sounds of a place dedicated to healing. And here I was, being accused of the very behaviors I spent my days helping others overcome. "Dr. Valdez," I said slowly, "you've worked with me for 4 years. Have you ever seen any indication that I use drugs or behave inappropriately with clients? She studied my face carefully. No, I haven't. Which is why this call was so surprising and concerning. Your work has always been exemplary, and your clients consistently report positive experiences. I nodded. Then you know these allegations don't align with anything you've observed about my character or performance. That's true, she agreed. However, addiction can be very well hidden, and family members often notice changes before colleagues do. I have to take any report of potential substance abuse seriously, especially given the nature of our work here. I understood her position completely. Northwest Mental Health Services dealt with vulnerable populations. Many of our clients were in recovery themselves, struggling with addiction, trauma, and mental health challenges. The last thing they needed was a counselor who was battling her own substance abuse issues. If I were in Dr. Valdez's position, I would handle it exactly the same way. What would you like me to do? I asked. I need you to submit to a drug test immediately, she said. Full panel, hair follicle, and urine. And I'm going to have to place you on administrative leave, pending the results. The administrative leave felt like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. I understand. When can we schedule the test? Tanya is arranging for you to go to the testing facility this afternoon. Results should be back within 48 hours. I stood up slowly, my mind already racing. Not about the drug test, because I knew exactly what those results would show. I'd never used illegal drugs in my life. I barely drank alcohol, and when I did, it was usually a single glass of wine with dinner on special occasions. The drug test would vindicate me completely. No, my mind was racing because I was trying to understand why my mother would make such a call. Victoria Hayes had always been controlling, always been manipulative, but this was a new level of destructive behavior, even for her. This wasn't just an attempt to embarrass me or cause family drama. This was a direct attack on my livelihood, my reputation, and my ability to help the people who depended on me. As I gathered my personal items from my office, Lisa Chen appeared in the doorway. Her concern was genuine, written clearly across her face. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "There are rumors flying around about a family emergency." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd become like a sister to me over the past few years. We'd covered for each other during difficult cases, celebrated each other's successes, and shared countless conversations about the challenges of working in mental health. She deserved honesty. "Someone in my family called and made false allegations about drug use," I said simply. "I'm going for testing this afternoon, and I'll be on leave until the results come back." Her eyes widened. "That's insane. You're literally the most straight-laced person I know. You won't even take Advil without reading the bottle twice." Despite everything, I smiled a little. The truth will come out. "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about it for a moment. "Actually, yes. Can you keep an eye on my clients? Make sure they know I'll be back soon, and that this has nothing to do with anything they've done or said." She nodded immediately. "Of course." I finished packing my things, including the small succulent plant from my desk that a grateful client had given me last month. As I walked through the clinic for what I hoped wouldn't be the last time, I caught glimpses of the work that mattered so much to me. A young woman in the waiting area, nervously fidgeting with her sleeve, probably attending her first group therapy session. An older man reading a magazine, likely waiting for his weekly individual appointment. A mother holding her teenage daughter's hand, both of them looking anxious but hopeful. These were the people I dedicated my career to helping. People struggling with addiction, trauma, depression, anxiety. People who needed someone in their corner, someone who believed in their ability to heal and grow. The thought that my mother's lies might prevent me from continuing this work made my chest tighten with anger. I drove to the testing facility in a state of controlled fury. The rain had let up, but the sky remained gray and heavy. Portland in November always felt like living inside a cloud, but today the weather seemed to match my mood perfectly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The testing facility was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation office, clinical and impersonal. The process was routine but humiliating. Forms to fill out, explanations of chain of custody procedures, the actual collection of samples under observation. The technician was professional but detached, probably used to dealing with people in my situation. I wondered how many of them were there voluntarily, clearing their names, versus how many were there under court order or employer mandate. As I drove home afterward, my phone started ringing. My father's number appeared on the screen. Robert Hayes. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother called. Victoria Hayes. I ignored that one too. Then Bradley, my older brother, the golden child who could do no wrong despite a history of actual substance abuse issues that had been covered up and explained away for years. I didn't want to talk to any of them until I had a better understanding of what was happening and why. Instead, I went home to my small apartment, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window overlooking the street. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional car driving through puddles and the distant sound of construction from the new condos going up 2 blocks away. That's when I remembered the envelope. 3 months earlier, when my grandmother Eleanor Rivers had passed away at 91, I'd attended her funeral with mixed emotions. Nana had been the only member of my extended family who'd consistently shown me genuine love and support. She'd encouraged my decision to pursue psychology, helped pay for my graduate school, and always seemed to understand me in a way my parents never did. Her death had left a hole in my life that I was still learning to navigate. After the funeral, her attorney, Marcus Thompson, had handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Nana's careful handwriting. He'd told me it was a personal letter, separate from the will, and that I should read it when I was ready. In the chaos of grief and work obligations, I'd tucked it into my desk drawer and honestly forgotten about it. Now, with the weight of the day's events pressing down on me, I felt drawn to that envelope. I retrieved it from my desk, noting how the paper felt slightly thick and expensive between my fingers. Nana had always appreciated quality, whether it was in people or things. I opened it carefully, not wanting to tear anything that she'd touched. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery with her monogram at the top, and below that, her message in blue ink. My dearest Chloe, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect your family is showing their true colors. You've always been the strong one, the honest one, the one who sees clearly, even when others try to cloud your vision. What I'm about to tell you will probably come as a shock, but I need you to know that everything I did was to protect what matters most, you, and the work you're meant to do in this world. Look in the safety deposit box at First National, box number 847. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my jewelry box, which I left to you. Trust Marcus Thompson and trust yourself. You're more powerful than they know. Love always, Nana. I read the letter 3 times, my heart beating faster with each pass. A safety deposit box I didn't know existed. A key hidden in a jewelry box that was now sitting in my bedroom closet, still unpacked from the move after her death. The phrase, "You're more powerful than they know," echoing in my mind. I went to my closet and pulled out the wooden jewelry box I'd inherited. It was beautiful, hand-carved with intricate patterns, something Nana had brought back from a trip to Europe decades ago. I'd always admired it as a child, and she'd promised it would be mine someday. I turned it upside down and felt along the bottom until my fingers found the edge of something taped to the wood. The key was small and brass, with the number 847 etched into it. I held it in my palm, this tiny piece of metal that apparently held answers to questions I didn't even know I should be asking. My grandmother had been a relatively simple woman, or so I'd thought. She'd lived modestly, volunteered at the local library, tended her garden, and doted on her grandchildren. The idea that she had secrets, hidden assets, or some kind of larger plan was completely outside my understanding of who she was. But then again, I was learning that my understanding of my family members might be more limited than I'd realized. The next morning, I called Marcus Thompson's office first thing. His secretary, a warm-voiced woman named Helen, told me he could see me that afternoon. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment obsessively, the kind of nervous energy cleaning that happens when your mind is too agitated to focus on anything else. Every surface got wiped down, every book got straightened, every piece of clothing got folded and put away. Marcus Thompson's law office was in an older building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and original hardwood floors that spoke to Portland's history before it became the trendy, tech-forward city it was today. His office felt like stepping back in time, with leather-bound books lining the walls and a massive oak desk that had probably been there since the 1940s. Marcus himself was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been my grandmother's attorney for over 30 years, and I remembered him from various family events throughout my childhood. He always seemed to genuinely care about Nana, not just as a client, but as a person. "Chloe," he said, standing to greet me, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." "Thank you," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. She left me a letter that mentioned a safety deposit box. His expression shifted to something more serious, more focused. "Ah, yes. I've been waiting for you to contact me about that. Eleanor was very specific about the timing and circumstances under which you should receive this information." He opened a file cabinet and withdrew a thick folder labeled with my name. "Before we go to the bank, there are some things you need to understand about your grandmother's true financial situation and her intentions for you." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced in Dr. Valdez's office the day before. The feeling that my understanding of reality was about to shift in fundamental ways. "I thought I knew everything about Nana's estate," I said. "The house went to my parents, some jewelry and personal items were distributed among the grandchildren, and there was a small savings account that got divided up." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's what your family was told, yes. But Eleanor had been planning for years, decades actually, and she was very concerned about certain family dynamics. She observed how your parents and brother treated you versus how they handled Bradley's numerous problems. She saw the favoritism, the manipulation, the way your achievements were downplayed while Bradley's mistakes were covered up and excused. The accuracy of his assessment was startling. Growing up, I'd often felt like I was living in an alternate reality where nothing I did was quite good enough, while Bradley could literally get arrested and somehow it would be spun as a learning experience or a phase he was going through. When I graduated with honors, the family dinner conversation focused on Bradley's new job. When I got promoted at work, my mother would change the subject to Bradley's girlfriend or his apartment, or anything that would shift attention away from my success. "She also saw your dedication to helping others," Marcus continued, "and your genuine calling to work in mental health and addiction recovery. Eleanor had her own experiences with addiction in the family, as you know." I did know. Nana had been married to my grandfather for 43 years before he died of liver failure related to alcoholism. She'd spent decades dealing with the chaos, broken promises, and emotional toll of loving someone with an addiction. She'd also spent years attending Al-Anon meetings and learning about the disease of addiction from every angle. "What does this have to do with the safety deposit box?" I asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Your grandmother didn't just leave you jewelry and sentimental items, Chloe. She left you Riverside Recovery Institute." The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but they felt like they were in a foreign language. "I'm sorry, what?" "Riverside Recovery Institute," he repeated. "The addiction treatment center outside of town. 60-bed residential facility, outpatient programs, family therapy services. Your grandmother has been the anonymous benefactor funding its operations for the past 15 years. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. Riverside Recovery Institute was one of the most respected addiction treatment centers in Oregon. I'd referred dozens of clients there over the years when they needed residential care. It was known for its holistic approach, excellent success rates, and sliding-scale payment options that made treatment accessible to people regardless of their financial situation. I'd always wondered who funded it, because the fees they charged couldn't possibly cover the level of care they provided. "That's impossible," I said finally. "Nana lived in a small house. She drove a 15-year-old Honda. She clipped coupons. Marcus smiled gently. Your grandmother was very good at appearing to live modestly, while actually being quite wealthy. She inherited substantial assets from her parents, invested wisely over the decades, and lived far below her means. The modest lifestyle was partly natural to her personality and partly protective. Protective from what? From family members who might have taken advantage of her generosity in ways that weren't in anyone's best interest. The implication hit me like a cold wave. My parents and Bradley didn't know about Nana's real wealth because she'd deliberately hidden it from them. She'd watched them cover up Bradley's addiction issues, enable his destructive behavior, and treat his problems as temporary inconveniences rather than serious health issues requiring intervention and treatment. The safety deposit box contains all the documentation, Marcus explained. Ownership papers, financial records, operational reports, everything you'll need to understand what you've inherited and how to manage it. My head was spinning. I don't know anything about running a treatment center. You don't have to run it directly, he assured me. There's an excellent administrative team already in place. James Kim has been the administrator for 8 years, and the clinical director, Dr. Sarah Martinez, has been there for 6. Your role would be as the owner and board chair, setting overall direction and ensuring the mission stays true to your grandmother's vision. Which was what, exactly? Marcus opened another folder and handed me a typed document. This is the mission statement she wrote when she first started funding the center. I think you'll find it aligns closely with your own values and professional goals. I read the single page slowly. It outlined a vision for addiction treatment that was compassionate, evidence-based, accessible to people of all economic backgrounds, and focused on treating the whole person rather than just the addiction. It emphasized the importance of family healing, trauma-informed care, and long-term recovery support. It could have been written by someone who'd spent years working in the field, not by an elderly woman whose main experience with addiction was being married to an alcoholic. She researched this extensively, Marcus said, watching me read. She attended conferences, consulted with experts, visited other treatment centers around the country. This wasn't a whim or a tax write-off. This was her life's work, and she wanted to ensure it would continue after she was gone. Why me? I asked. Why not my parents, or Bradley, or someone with more experience? Because you're the only one in the family who shares her values and has the professional background to appreciate what she built. Your parents see everything through the lens of control and image management. Bradley has his own addiction issues that he's never properly addressed. You're the one who chose to dedicate your career to helping people heal. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. Less than 24 hours earlier, my mother had called my workplace and accused me of being a drug addict. And now I was learning that I'd inherited one of the most respected addiction treatment centers in the state. There's more, Marcus said, opening yet another folder. The will also established a foundation with enough funding to operate the center for approximately 20 years, even if no other revenue came in. Your grandmother wanted to ensure that money would never be the reason someone couldn't get treatment. I felt overwhelmed by the scope of what he was describing. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a responsibility. It was my grandmother's life work being placed in my hands, along with the trust that I would honor her vision and continue her mission. When do I need to make decisions about this? I asked. There's no rush, Marcus replied. The center is operating smoothly, and the transition can happen gradually. But there is one thing that's time-sensitive. I waited for him to continue. Your grandmother included a provision in the will that if anyone in the family attempts to challenge your inheritance or interfere with your work at Riverside, the foundation funding gets redirected to other addiction treatment centers around the country. She was very concerned about protecting both you and the center from family manipulation. The provision felt prescient given yesterday's phone call to my workplace. Nana had somehow anticipated that my family might try to sabotage my professional life, and she'd built in protection against exactly that kind of interference. I'd like to see the safety deposit box, I said finally. Marcus smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. First National Bank was a short walk from Marcus's office. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, accessed through a heavy vault door that looked like something from an old movie. The bank employee who accompanied us was a middle-aged woman who had apparently known my grandmother for years. Eleanor was such a lovely lady, she said as we walked through the vault. Always so kind, always asking about my family. I was so sorry to hear about her passing. Box 847 was larger than I'd expected, roughly the size of a small filing cabinet drawer. It required both my key and the bank's key to open. Inside were several manila envelopes, each labeled in Nana's careful handwriting. The first envelope contained the deed to Riverside Recovery Institute, with my name listed as the new owner. The second contained financial statements showing the current operating budget, reserve funds, and long-term projections. The third contained detailed reports on the center's programs, success rates, and patient outcomes. But it was the fourth envelope that made my hands shake slightly as I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing people I didn't recognize in various settings around what was clearly the treatment center. Group therapy sessions, graduation ceremonies, family visits, recreational activities. And attached to each photo was a small note in my grandmother's handwriting. Tom, 43, carpenter, 6 months sober, back with his kids. Maria, 28, teacher, 1 year clean, starting graduate school. David, 51, veteran, 18 months sober, volunteer firefighter now. Page after page of faces, stories, lives that had been changed because of the center my grandmother had quietly funded for 15 years. People who'd found hope, rebuilt relationships, discovered new purposes, families that had healed, children who had their parents back. I looked up at Marcus, tears blurring my vision. She documented all of this. She visited regularly, he said gently. Always quietly, never making a big deal about being the benefactor. She just wanted to see the impact of her investment. I thought about all the times over the years when Nana had asked about my work, showing genuine interest in the clients I was helping and the challenges I faced in the mental health field. I'd assumed it was just her natural compassion and curiosity. Now I understood that she was learning about the field she was secretly supporting, and probably evaluating whether I was the right person to eventually take over her mission. The last item in the safety deposit box was a letter addressed to me, different from the one she'd left in her jewelry box. This one was longer, written on several sheets of the same cream-colored stationery. My dearest Chloe, it began. If you're reading this, then you now know about Riverside and the foundation. I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed, and that's perfectly normal. I felt the same way when I first decided to start funding addiction treatment. It seemed like such a huge responsibility, and I worried that I wasn't qualified to make decisions about something so important. But then I realized that the people who are best suited to help others heal are often those who understand suffering, loss, and the importance of genuine compassion. You've spent your career learning how to support people through their darkest moments. You understand that addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. You know that recovery is possible for everyone, regardless of their background or how many times they've tried before. More than that, you've experienced firsthand what it's like to be the responsible one in a family that doesn't always appreciate responsibility. You know what it feels like to have your achievements minimized and your character questioned. You understand the importance of having someone in your corner who believes in your potential, even when you're struggling to believe in yourself. I've watched you grow into a woman of integrity, compassion, and strength. I've seen how you handle difficult situations with grace and how you never give up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. These are exactly the qualities needed to guide Riverside into the future. The center has given me tremendous joy over the years, but it's also been a heavy responsibility at times. There have been setbacks, tragedies, and moments when I wondered if I was doing enough or doing it right. But then I would get a letter from someone who'd completed treatment, or hear about a family that had been reunited, or see a success story like the ones in these photos, and I would remember why this work matters so much. You don't have to carry this responsibility alone. The staff at Riverside is exceptional, and Marcus will help you navigate the legal and financial aspects. But ultimately, the vision and values of the center will be shaped by your decisions. I trust you to honor what we've built while also making it your own. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and this is perhaps the most important part. Your parents and Bradley don't know about any of this. I made that choice deliberately, because I've watched how they handle money and responsibility, and I don't believe they would use these resources in ways that align with the center's mission. If they discover your inheritance, they will likely try to convince you to include them in the management or to use the foundation's resources for other purposes. They may become angry or accusatory. They may question your qualifications or try to undermine your confidence. This is why I included the protection clause in the will. If anyone in the family tries to interfere with Riverside or with your work there, the funding gets redirected away from all of us. I'm telling you this not to create division in the family, but to prepare you for the possibility that they may not react well to learning that you've inherited something significant that they weren't included in. Remember that their reaction will say more about them than about you, and that you have every right to protect what you've been given. I love you more than words can express, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Take care of yourself, take care of Riverside, and never let anyone make you feel like you're not worthy of this responsibility. Oh, my love, Nana. I sat in the bank vault for a long time after finishing the letter, processing everything I'd learned. The scope of what my grandmother had built was staggering, but even more impressive was the thoughtfulness and foresight she'd put into planning for the future. She'd anticipated challenges I hadn't even considered and built in protections I didn't know I needed. Marcus waited patiently while I gathered my thoughts. Finally, I looked up at him and said, "I want to visit Riverside." "I think that's an excellent idea," he replied. "Would you like me to call ahead and arrange for you to meet with James Kim?" "Not yet," I said. "I'd like to see it first as just a visitor, maybe as someone seeking information for a client. I want to understand what it's really like before I reveal who I am." Marcus nodded approvingly. Very wise. Eleanor would be proud of that approach. As we left the bank, I felt like I was carrying a secret that was both exciting and terrifying. Less than 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been clearing my name after my mother's false drug allegations. Now I was the owner of a major addiction treatment center, with a multi-million-dollar foundation behind it. But first, I had to get through the drug test results and hopefully return to my job at Northwest Mental Health Services. Because regardless of what I'd inherited, I still had clients who needed me, and I still had a calling to help people heal from addiction and trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' attempt to destroy my career in addiction counseling had led directly to me discovering that I now owned one of the best addiction treatment centers in the state. But I had a feeling that irony was just the beginning of this story. The drug test results came back exactly as I'd expected, clean across the board. Not even caffeine registered, which made sense since I'd been drinking herbal tea instead of coffee that week due to a minor stomach issue. Dr. Valdez called me personally to deliver the news, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Chloe, I want to apologize for having to put you through this process," she said. "The allegations were serious enough that I had no choice but to investigate. But I'm grateful the results confirm what I already believed about your character." "I understand completely," I replied, meaning it. "You had to protect the client's and the clinic's reputation. I would have done the same thing in your position. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'd like to discuss your return to work and how we can support you through whatever family situation prompted this incident." After hanging up, I sat quietly in my apartment, watching the rain streak down the windows. The vindication felt good, but it was overshadowed by the larger questions about my family's motivations and my newfound inheritance. I decided to visit Riverside Recovery Institute that afternoon, while I still had time before returning to work. The drive took me through winding roads that led into the foothills outside Portland. The landscape transitioned from urban neighborhoods to rural farmland, then into heavily forested areas with glimpses of the Willamette River through the trees. It was the kind of scenery that immediately felt peaceful, exactly what someone in early recovery might need. Riverside Recovery Institute sat on about 50 acres of beautifully maintained grounds. The main building was a converted mansion from the early 1900s, all stone and timber, with wraparound porches and large windows that would fill the interior with natural light. Smaller buildings were scattered across the property, connected by paved walking paths that meandered through gardens and along the riverbank. I parked in the visitor area and walked toward the main entrance, trying to see the place through the eyes of someone seeking treatment. The landscaping was immaculate but not intimidating, welcoming rather than institutional. A small sign by the front door simply read, "Riverside Recovery Institute, Healing Begins Here." The reception area felt more like the lobby of a high-end retreat than a medical facility. Comfortable seating areas were arranged around a stone fireplace, and large windows overlooked the river. The walls displayed local artwork, including several pieces that appeared to have been created in art therapy sessions. Classical music played softly in the background. "Good afternoon," said the woman behind the reception desk. She was probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. Her name tag read, "Jennifer Guest Services. How can I help you today?" "I'm a mental health counselor in the city," I explained, which was completely true. "I work with clients who sometimes need residential treatment, and I wanted to learn more about your program so I can make appropriate referrals." "Of course," Jennifer replied. "Dr. Martinez usually handles professional visits, but she's in a meeting right now. Would you like me to give you some information packets, or would you prefer to schedule a formal tour?" "Information would be great for now," I said. "I'm particularly interested in your approach to dual diagnosis treatment and family involvement." She handed me a folder thick with brochures and program descriptions. Dr. Martinez wrote most of these herself. She's really passionate about treating the whole person, not just the addiction. And our family program is one of the most comprehensive in the region. As I flipped through the materials, I was struck by the quality and thoughtfulness of the content. These weren't generic brochures with stock photos and vague promises. They contained detailed descriptions of evidence-based treatment modalities, outcome statistics, and testimonials from actual graduates of the program. "We also have a newsletter," Jennifer added, handing me a glossy publication. "It includes stories from people who've completed treatment, updates on program developments, and articles about addiction and recovery topics." The newsletter was equally impressive. The lead story featured a man named Carlos who'd completed treatment 6 months earlier and was now working as a peer recovery specialist at another facility. His photo showed him with his 2 young children, all of them smiling on a beach somewhere. The article described his journey from homelessness and IV drug use to stable housing, steady employment, and rebuilt relationships with his family. "This is really inspiring," I said honestly. "Carlos speaks at our graduation ceremonies sometimes," Jennifer said. "It's powerful for current clients to see someone who's been where they are and made it through to the other side." I spent another few minutes looking through the materials, then thanked Jennifer and walked back to my car. But instead of leaving immediately, I drove around the property slowly, taking in more details. I saw clients walking the river path, some alone, and some in small groups. They looked like ordinary people dealing with extraordinary challenges, which of course they were. Near the back of the property, I noticed a newer building that wasn't visible from the main entrance. The sign identified it as the Eleanor Rivers Family Center, my grandmother's name on a building at the facility she'd funded. I parked and walked closer, emotion rising in my throat. The family center was beautiful, designed to look like a large, welcoming home rather than a clinical facility. Through the windows, I could see comfortable meeting rooms, a children's play area, and what appeared to be a kitchen where families could share meals together during visits. A small plaque by the entrance read, "Dedicated to the belief that healing happens in relationship and that families can recover together." I stood there for a long time, thinking about my grandmother's own experience with addiction in the family. My grandfather's drinking had caused decades of pain, broken promises, and chaos. But Nana had stayed, learned, grown, and eventually channeled her experience into something that could help other families avoid the same suffering. The drive back to Portland gave me time to process what I'd seen. Riverside wasn't just a treatment center, it was a testament to the possibility of transformation. Every detail, from the welcoming architecture to the comprehensive family programming, reflected a deep understanding of what people in recovery needed to heal and rebuild their lives. That evening, I called Marcus Thompson at home. "I visited Riverside today," I told him. "What did you think?" "It's incredible. I can see why Nana was so proud of what she'd built there." "Are you ready to meet with James Kim and Dr. Martinez?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I think I am." The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon, after I'd had a few days to settle back into work at Northwest Mental Health Services. Returning to the clinic felt both normal and surreal. My clients welcomed me back warmly, and several mentioned that they'd been worried about me during my brief absence. Lisa Chen had kept them informed that I was dealing with a family emergency but would be returning soon. "Everything okay?" she asked privately during a break between sessions. "Getting better," I replied. The drug test was completely clean, obviously, and Dr. Valdez has been very supportive. I think my family was trying to cause problems for reasons I'm still figuring out. That's awful. Why would they do something like that? It was a good question, and one I'd been pondering since the phone call incident. My parents had always been controlling and manipulative, but this felt different. More desperate, more vicious. It made me wonder if they'd somehow learned about Nana's will and were trying to undermine my credibility before I could claim my inheritance. Friday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Oregon. I drove out to Riverside with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This would be my first time there as the owner rather than just a visitor, and I wasn't sure how it would feel to step into that role. James Kim met me in the lobby, and I recognized him immediately as someone who belonged in this environment. He was probably in his early 50s, with an easy smile and the kind of calm presence that would be reassuring to people in crisis. His handshake was firm, and his eye contact was direct and warm. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you," he said. "Eleanor spoke about you often, always with such pride and affection." "She talked about me here?" "Oh, yes." She was very involved in the day-to-day operations, even though she preferred to stay behind the scenes. She knew all the staff by name, kept track of program outcomes, and always asked about specific clients she'd met during her visits. Dr. Sarah Martinez joined us a few minutes later. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 30s, with the kind of energy and passion that made it clear she'd found her calling in addiction medicine. Her enthusiasm for the work was immediately apparent and infectious. "Chloe," she said, "Eleanor used to say that someday we'd have a clinical director who really understood both sides of the treatment world. She was so proud that you'd chosen to work in addiction counseling." We spent the next 3 hours touring every aspect of the facility. The residential units were comfortable and homelike, with private rooms and common areas that encouraged both personal reflection and community building. The clinical spaces were state-of-the-art but not intimidating, designed to feel safe and welcoming rather than institutional. The medical detox unit was particularly impressive. Instead of the sterile, hospital-like environment I'd expected, it felt more like a spa, with soft lighting, comfortable furnishings, and large windows overlooking the gardens. Dr. Martinez explained that the physical environment played a crucial role in helping people through the most difficult early days of recovery. "We know that withdrawal is traumatic enough without making people feel like they're in a prison or a hospital," she said. "The goal is to create an atmosphere where healing can begin immediately, even while someone is still physically uncomfortable." The family center was even more beautiful on the inside than I'd imagined from my glimpse through the windows. The children's play area was thoughtfully designed with educational toys and art supplies. The meeting rooms were comfortable and private, allowing families to have difficult conversations in a supportive environment. The kitchen was fully functional, enabling families to prepare meals together as part of the healing process. "Family involvement is crucial to long-term recovery success," James explained. "Addiction affects everyone in the system, and recovery needs to happen at the family level, not just the individual level." We visited the vocational training center, where clients could learn job skills that would help them transition back into the community. The art therapy studio, where beautiful pieces covered the walls, created by people working through trauma and rebuilding their sense of self. The meditation garden, where clients could find quiet space for reflection and spiritual growth. Every program and service reflected the same thoughtful approach, the same commitment to treating people with dignity and respect, the same belief that recovery was possible for everyone, regardless of their history or how many times they'd tried before. "Your grandmother had very strong opinions about how treatment should work," Dr. Martinez said as we sat in her office reviewing program outcomes. "She insisted that we never give up on anyone, that we meet people where they are rather than where we think they should be, and that we treat every person who walks through our doors like they're someone's beloved child. Because they are, I said softly. Exactly. That perspective has shaped everything we do here. James pulled out a thick binder filled with statistics and success stories. Our completion rate is about 15% higher than the national average for residential programs. Our 12-month sobriety rate is about 20% higher. But the numbers Eleanor was most proud of were the family reunification statistics. He showed me charts tracking how many clients had rebuilt relationships with their children, spouses, parents, or siblings during and after treatment. The percentages were remarkable, reflecting the emphasis on family healing that was woven throughout all the programming. We measure success not just by sobriety, but by quality of life improvement, Dr. Martinez added. Employment, housing stability, family relationships, mental health, overall life satisfaction. Eleanor wanted to know that people weren't just getting clean, they were building lives worth living. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself feeling more and more connected to the mission and vision that my grandmother had created. This wasn't just a business, or even just a treatment center. It was a community, a place where people could discover that they were worthy of love, healing, and second chances. There's something else we need to discuss, James said near the end of our meeting. Eleanor left very specific instructions about how she wanted the transition to happen. He handed me another folder, this one containing a detailed transition plan that my grandmother had apparently been working on for months before her death. It outlined a gradual process where I would take on increasing responsibility over the course of a year, learning all aspects of the operation before fully stepping into the leadership role. She didn't want you to feel overwhelmed or pressured to make immediate changes, Dr. Martinez explained. She wanted you to have time to understand the culture and the programs before making any decisions about the future direction. The plan was typically thoughtful and thorough, addressing everything from board governance to staff relationships to community partnerships. It also included provisions for my continued work at Northwest Mental Health Services, recognizing that I might want to maintain my clinical practice even as I took on ownership responsibilities at Riverside. She thought your outside perspective would be valuable, James said. She worried that people in residential treatment sometimes lose touch with what's happening in outpatient and community-based programs. She wanted Riverside to stay connected to the full continuum of care. As I drove back to Portland that evening, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for my grandmother's wisdom and planning. She'd not only left me an incredible legacy, she'd created a roadmap for how to honor that legacy responsibly. The transition plan would allow me to learn gradually, while ensuring that the high-quality programming continued without interruption. But I also felt the weight of the responsibility. Hundreds of people every year would depend on the decisions I made as the owner of Riverside. Families would trust us with their most precious relationships. Staff members would look to me for leadership and vision. The community would expect us to be good stewards of the resources we'd been given. That weekend, I spent hours reading through all the materials James and Dr. Martinez had given me: financial reports, program evaluations, accreditation documents, staff personnel files, client outcome studies. The depth and quality of the work being done at Riverside was truly impressive, but it also made me aware of how much I still needed to learn. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. My mother's number appeared on the screen. I'd been avoiding my family's calls since the drug test incident, but I decided it was time to face whatever they had to say. "Chloe?" Victoria's voice was sharp and accusatory. "We need to talk." "About what, Mom?" "About this attitude you've developed. Ignoring our calls. Being disrespectful. Acting like you're too good for your own family." I almost laughed at the irony. She was calling me disrespectful after making false drug allegations to my employer. "I've been busy with work," I said calmly. "We heard you were suspended for drug use." I was placed on administrative leave while the allegations were investigated. The drug test was completely clean, and I'm back at work. There was a pause, and I could hear my father's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Well, good," she said finally. "We were concerned about you." The false concern in her voice was transparent and nauseating. "Mom, why did you call my workplace and make those accusations?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Dr. Valdez told me exactly what you said. About methamphetamines, hallucinations, stealing money from clients. Why would you do that? Another pause, longer this time. Someone needed to intervene before you hurt yourself or someone else. Based on what evidence? When have you ever seen me use drugs or behave erratically? A mother knows these things. The conversation was pointless. She was never going to admit what she'd done or explain her motivations. But her defensiveness told me everything I needed to know. This had been a deliberate attempt to sabotage my career, not a misguided expression of concern. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? I asked. Actually, yes. We're having a family dinner next Sunday for your father's birthday. We expect you to be there. The command in her voice was familiar, the assumption that I would comply with their wishes regardless of how they'd treated me. For most of my life, I probably would have agreed to attend, swallowed my anger, and pretended everything was normal. But something had shifted in me over the past week. I'll need to check my schedule, I said. Check your schedule? It's your father's birthday. I understand that. I said, I'll check my schedule and let you know. I could hear her breathing change, the sharp intake that usually preceded one of her lectures about family obligation and proper behavior. But I didn't give her the chance. I need to go now, I said. I'll talk to you later. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately turned off my phone. The conversation had confirmed my suspicions about their motivations, and it had also clarified something important about my own boundaries. I was done allowing them to treat me with disrespect while demanding my compliance with their wishes. That night, I reread my grandmother's letter about the family protection clause in the will. She'd anticipated exactly this kind of manipulation and built in safeguards to protect both me and Riverside from family interference. The conversation with my mother made it clear that those protections might be necessary sooner than I'd expected. Monday morning brought a return to routine at Northwest Mental Health Services, but with a new sense of purpose and possibility. During my lunch break, I called Marcus Thompson to discuss the next steps in the transition process at Riverside. How did the meeting go with James and Dr. Martinez? He asked. It was wonderful. They're both incredibly dedicated, and the facility is even more impressive than I'd imagined. I'd like to start the transition process as outlined in Nana's plan. Excellent. I'll prepare the paperwork to officially transfer ownership and set up the first board meeting. Marcus, there's something else. My mother called yesterday, and the conversation made it clear that my family is going to have questions about any changes in my financial situation. How much do they legally have a right to know about the inheritance? Nothing, he said firmly. Eleanor's will was very clear about privacy protections. They have no legal right to information about your inheritance, and the protection clause specifically prevents them from challenging or interfering with your ownership of Riverside. What if they become suspicious and start asking questions? You're under no obligation to answer those questions. In fact, I'd recommend that you don't discuss the inheritance with them at all until you're fully established in your role at Riverside and comfortable with your position. His advice aligned with my instincts. The less my family knew about my inheritance, the less opportunity they'd have to create problems or try to insert themselves into the situation. That afternoon, I had a session with a client named Rebecca, who'd been struggling with alcohol addiction for several years. She was a teacher in her early 40s, divorced, with 2 teenage children who were understandably angry about the chaos her drinking had created in their lives. She'd been to outpatient treatment twice before but had never been able to maintain long-term sobriety. I think I need residential treatment, she said during our session. The outpatient approach isn't working for me, and my kids deserve better than what I've been giving them. I found myself thinking immediately about Riverside and the family programming I'd learned about during my visit. Rebecca's situation was exactly the kind of complex family dynamic that their approach was designed to address. There's a facility I'd like to tell you about, I said, pulling out one of the brochures Jennifer had given me. They specialize in family healing alongside individual recovery. As I described Riverside's programs, I watched Rebecca's expression change from hopelessness to something that looked like cautious optimism. The idea that her children could be involved in her recovery process, that they could heal together rather than her trying to fix everything on her own, clearly resonated with her. Could you help me contact them? She asked. Of course. After Rebecca left, I sat in my office thinking about the strange circularity of the situation. Here I was, referring a client to a facility that I owned, but that neither of us fully understood yet. It felt like a sign that the work I was meant to do was already beginning to happen naturally. The rest of the week passed quietly, with a gradual return to normal routine at the clinic. But underneath the ordinary surface, I could feel the undercurrent of change. I was carrying a secret that would eventually transform my life, and I was beginning to understand the scope of the responsibility I'd inherited. Friday afternoon, James Kim called to follow up on our meeting and discuss the timeline for my first official board meeting as the new owner of Riverside. We usually meet monthly, he explained, but Dr. Martinez and I thought it might be helpful to schedule a special meeting focused on orienting you to the board governance process. That sounds perfect. What should I expect? Nothing too formal. You'll meet the other board members, all of whom worked closely with Eleanor, and are excited to meet you. We'll review the current strategic plan, discuss any immediate operational issues, and start talking about your vision for the future. The idea of having a vision for the future of Riverside was both exciting and intimidating. I'd spent my career following other people's visions, working within programs and systems that other people had designed. Now I would be responsible for setting the direction for an organization that affected hundreds of lives every year. That evening, I drove out to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. Her grave was in a quiet section overlooking a small pond, marked by a simple granite stone with her name, dates, and a brief inscription. She made a difference. I sat on the grass beside her grave and talked to her the way I used to when she was alive, telling her about my visit to Riverside, my meeting with James and Dr. Martinez, my growing understanding of what she'd built and why she'd chosen me to continue it. I hope I can do this right, I said out loud. I hope I can honor what you created and make it even better. The wind rustled through the trees, and I felt a sense of peace that I'd been missing since her death. She'd given me not just an inheritance, but a purpose. Not just resources, but a mission. Not just a legacy, but a future. As I drove home, I thought about the journey ahead. Learning to lead an organization, understanding the complexities of addiction treatment, navigating the family dynamics that my inheritance would inevitably create. It felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time, but I also thought about the people who would benefit from Riverside's programs. People like Rebecca, who needed comprehensive, family-focused treatment. People like Carlos, who'd found their way back to meaningful lives. People whose stories were still being written. My grandmother had spent 15 years quietly funding hope for people in their darkest moments. Now it was my turn to carry that mission forward, to ensure that Riverside continued to be a place where healing could happen and lives could be transformed. The work ahead would be challenging, but it would also be the most meaningful work I could imagine. And somehow, I knew that Nana was proud of the woman I was becoming and the responsibility I was ready to accept. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Riverside, and I arrived early to settle my nerves and review my notes one more time. The boardroom was located on the second floor of the main building, with large windows overlooking the river and comfortable chairs arranged around a polished conference table. The walls displayed framed certificates of accreditation and photographs of graduation ceremonies spanning the past 15 years. James Kim introduced me to the other board members as they arrived. Dr. Patricia Henley was a retired psychiatrist who specialized in addiction medicine and had been Eleanor's closest advisor on clinical matters. Robert Chen was a local businessman whose own son had completed treatment at Riverside 5 years earlier. Maria Santos was a licensed clinical social worker who ran a nonprofit organization serving homeless populations. Each of them had worked closely with my grandmother and shared her commitment to compassionate, evidence-based treatment. "Eleanor spoke about you constantly," Dr. Henley said warmly as we settled into our seats. "She was so proud of your work in the field and your dedication to helping others heal from trauma and addiction. She showed us articles you'd written for professional journals," Maria added. "And she always lit up when she talked about your clients and the progress they were making." I felt a familiar tightness in my throat, the emotion that always came when I was reminded of how much my grandmother had believed in me and supported my career, even when my own parents seemed indifferent to my achievements. The meeting began with James presenting a comprehensive overview of Riverside's current operations. The statistics were impressive across every metric that mattered. Admission rates had remained steady despite increased competition from newer facilities. Client satisfaction scores consistently exceeded industry standards. Staff retention was remarkably high, with most clinical team members staying for several years rather than the typical 1 or 2 year cycles common in addiction treatment. Your grandmother insisted on paying competitive salaries and providing excellent benefits, Dr. Henley explained. She understood that continuity of care was crucial for client outcomes, and that meant creating an environment where talented staff wanted to stay long-term. The financial reports were equally encouraging. The foundation Eleanor had established provided a solid endowment that could support operations for decades, even without additional revenue. But the center was also generating significant income through insurance reimbursements, private pay clients, and contracts with employee assistance programs from local businesses. We're completely debt-free and have healthy reserves for capital improvements and program expansion, Robert Chen noted. Eleanor was very conservative financially, but she also understood the importance of investing in quality facilities and equipment. Dr. Martinez presented updates on clinical programming, including several new initiatives that had been implemented over the past year. A trauma-informed yoga program was showing promising results for clients with histories of physical or sexual abuse. A vocational training partnership with local community colleges was helping graduates develop job skills that supported long-term recovery. The family program had expanded to include grandparents and adult children, recognizing that addiction affects multiple generations. We're always looking for ways to improve outcomes, Dr. Martinez explained. Eleanor encouraged innovation and experimentation, as long as everything we tried was grounded in evidence and focused on client well-being. As the meeting progressed, I found myself asking questions about aspects of the operation that hadn't been covered in my initial tour. How did they handle clients who needed ongoing mental health treatment after completing the addiction program? What was their approach to clients with disabilities or special medical needs? How did they maintain connections with graduates to support long-term recovery? Each question revealed additional layers of thoughtfulness in the programming. Riverside had partnerships with mental health providers throughout the region to ensure continuity of care for clients with dual diagnoses. The facility was fully accessible and had experience working with clients who had physical disabilities, cognitive impairments, or chronic medical conditions. The alumni program included regular social events, ongoing support groups, and a mentorship system that connected recent graduates with people who had longer-term sobriety. Your questions tell us a lot about your priorities, Maria Santos observed. Eleanor would be pleased to see that you're thinking about the whole person and the full continuum of care. Near the end of the meeting, James presented the transition timeline that Eleanor had outlined in her planning documents. The process would begin immediately with my attendance at board meetings and regular visits to familiarize myself with daily operations. Over the following 6 months, I would gradually take on more responsibility for strategic planning and policy decisions. By the end of the year, I would assume full ownership responsibilities while maintaining the collaborative leadership approach that had made the center successful. Eleanor was very clear that she didn't want you to feel pressured to make immediate changes, Dr. Henley said. She valued the culture and programming that had been developed over 15 years, and she wanted you to understand it thoroughly before deciding how to build on it. The timeline felt both ambitious and reasonable. It would allow me to continue my work at Northwest Mental Health Services while learning the complexities of organizational leadership. More importantly, it would ensure that any changes I eventually made would be informed by deep understanding rather than superficial impressions. After the meeting, Dr. Martinez invited me to observe a family therapy session with the client's permission. The session involved a woman in her 30s who was 3 weeks into residential treatment, along with her mother and teenage daughter. The family had been fractured by years of chaos related to the client's cocaine addiction, and they were working to rebuild trust and communication. I watched from behind a one-way mirror as Dr. Martinez skillfully facilitated conversations that allowed each family member to express their pain, anger, and hopes for the future. The client took responsibility for the harm her addiction had caused, while her mother and daughter shared how her behavior had affected their lives. But the session wasn't focused on blame or recrimination. Instead, Dr. Martinez guided them toward understanding addiction as a disease that had affected the entire family system, and recovery as a process that needed to involve everyone. Family healing is often the most complex part of recovery, Dr. Martinez explained during a break in the session. Individual clients can make tremendous progress in residential treatment, but if they return to family systems that haven't healed, the risk of relapse increases significantly. The approach made perfect sense to me, both professionally and personally. I'd seen too many clients struggle to maintain sobriety when they returned to families that continued to enable addiction, deny problems, or maintain unhealthy dynamics. But I'd also seen the power of family support when it was informed, boundaried, and focused on mutual healing rather than control. As I drove back to Portland that afternoon, I found myself thinking about my own family dynamics and how they might be affected by my inheritance. My parents and Bradley had spent decades maintaining a system where Bradley's problems were minimized and covered up, while my achievements were downplayed and my boundaries were routinely violated. The phone call to my workplace had been an escalation of their usual patterns, but it wasn't fundamentally different from the way they'd always operated. The protection clause in Eleanor's will was beginning to make even more sense. She'd understood that my family's dysfunction could potentially interfere with the important work being done at Riverside, and she'd built in safeguards to prevent that interference. But I was also beginning to understand that I would need to develop my own strategies for managing family relationships while protecting my new responsibilities. The following week brought an unexpected challenge when Rebecca, the client I'd referred to Riverside, called to say she'd been accepted into their next residential cohort and would be starting treatment in 10 days. Her insurance had approved a 60-day stay, and she was both excited and terrified about the prospect of intensive treatment. "I keep thinking about what you said regarding family healing," she told me during our session. "My kids have been so angry with me for so long, I'm not sure they'll even be willing to participate in family therapy." "That's a common concern," I replied. "But the therapists at Riverside are very skilled at meeting family members where they are, and helping them understand that their participation isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about healing for everyone involved." As I spoke about Riverside's family program, I felt the strange disconnection of describing a place I was learning to lead, while maintaining my role as an outside referral source. Rebecca had no idea that I owned the facility she'd be entering, and I couldn't decide whether or when it might be appropriate to share that information. The ethical complexity of the situation became even more apparent when Dr. Martinez called me later that week to discuss Rebecca's treatment plan. It was standard practice for residential facilities to collaborate with referring therapists, but the conversation felt different when I knew I was actually the owner of the facility rather than just a professional colleague. "We've completed Rebecca's assessment," Dr. Martinez said, "and we think she'll be an excellent fit for our program. Her motivation is high, and she has good insight into how her addiction has affected her family relationships." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. "What's your sense of how her children might respond to the family component?" "Our family therapist spoke with them by phone, and they're cautiously willing to participate. They've been hurt deeply, but they also love their mother and want to see her succeed." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering treatment goals, estimated length of stay, and plans for transitional support after Rebecca completed the residential program. Throughout the discussion, I found myself thinking about the dual role I was occupying and whether it was sustainable long-term. After hanging up, I called Marcus Thompson to discuss the ethical implications of my situation. "It's not uncommon for mental health professionals to have ownership interests in treatment facilities," he assured me. "But you're right to be thinking about potential conflicts of interest. The key is transparency and appropriate boundaries." "What does that look like practically?" "Eventually, you'll need to decide whether to continue your clinical practice or focus entirely on Riverside. Many people in your position choose to transition out of direct client care and into organizational leadership. But if you do continue seeing clients, you'll need clear policies about referrals and financial relationships." His advice was helpful, but it also highlighted the complexity of the transition I was navigating. I loved my clinical work and wasn't ready to give up direct client care, but I also recognized that my growing responsibilities at Riverside would eventually require more time and attention than I could manage, while maintaining a full caseload. That weekend, I spent time reading professional literature about leadership transitions in healthcare organizations. The research emphasized the importance of gradual change, stakeholder input, and maintaining organizational culture during periods of transition. Everything I read reinforced the wisdom of Eleanor's timeline and approach. I also spent time reviewing the financial documents related to the foundation she'd established. The endowment was even larger than I'd initially understood, with diversified investments that provided steady income while protecting the principal. Eleanor had worked with financial advisors who specialized in nonprofit management to ensure that the money would be available for decades to come. But as I studied the financial statements, I began to notice patterns that raised questions. Large transfers had been made to the foundation account in the months leading up to Eleanor's death, much larger than her usual annual contributions. The money had come from the sale of stocks and bonds that had been in her portfolio for years, suggesting that she'd liquidated significant personal assets to fund the endowment. I called Marcus Thompson on Monday morning to ask about the timing and size of those transfers. Eleanor was very focused on ensuring the foundation was fully funded before her death, he explained. She liquidated most of her personal investment portfolio in her final year and transferred the proceeds to the foundation. Was she concerned about something specific? There was a pause before he answered. She was concerned about your family's potential reaction to learning about your inheritance. She wanted to make sure the foundation was completely protected from any challenges or claims they might attempt to make. His words sent a chill through me. Eleanor had apparently anticipated not just general family dysfunction, but specific attempts to challenge or interfere with my inheritance. The level of forethought and protection she'd built into the arrangement suggested that she'd been very worried about what my family might do when they learned about Riverside. Did she say anything specific about what she was expecting? She mentioned that your parents had a history of trying to control financial decisions for other family members, and that they might view your inheritance as something that should be shared or managed collectively rather than owned individually. The description was accurate and disturbing. My parents had indeed tried to insert themselves into financial decisions for various family members over the years, always under the guise of being helpful but actually motivated by their own desire for control and influence. Marcus, what would happen if they tried to challenge the will or claim that Eleanor wasn't competent when she made these decisions? They would lose, he said firmly. Eleanor had multiple medical evaluations confirming her mental competency in the months before her death. The will was witnessed by independent parties, and there's extensive documentation of her decision-making process. But more importantly, the protection clause would be triggered, and the foundation funding would be redirected away from Riverside entirely. The protection clause was both reassuring and sobering. It would prevent my family from successfully challenging my inheritance, but it would also potentially destroy the work Eleanor had spent 15 years building if they attempted such a challenge. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my brother Bradley. We hadn't spoken since before Eleanor's funeral, and his voice on the phone sounded strained and urgent. "Chloe, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "About what?" "About Nana's will. Mom and Dad are asking questions about whether you got anything besides the jewelry, and I think they suspect there's more to the story." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of questions?" "They're wondering why you haven't been more upset about her death, why you seem so calm and confident lately. Mom thinks you might have inherited money that you're not telling them about." The irony was breathtaking. My mother was suspicious that I might be hiding a financial inheritance while she was simultaneously covering up the fact that she'd called my workplace with false drug allegations designed to destroy my career. "Bradley, I inherited some jewelry and personal items, just like everyone else. Whatever Mom thinks she's noticing about my behavior is probably just me processing grief differently than she expected." "Are you sure that's all?" "Because they're talking about hiring a lawyer to review the will and make sure everything was handled properly." The threat was clear, even if Bradley wasn't stating it directly. My parents were considering legal action to challenge Eleanor's will based on their suspicions that I'd received more than my fair share of the inheritance. "They can hire any lawyer they want," I said calmly. Nana's will was properly executed, and her wishes were very clear. "Chloe, just tell me the truth. Did she leave you anything significant that the rest of us don't know about?" The question put me in an impossible position. I couldn't lie to Bradley, but I also couldn't reveal information that would inevitably lead to the family conflict that Eleanor had been so concerned about preventing. "Bradley, if Nana had wanted the family to know about every aspect of her estate planning, she would have shared that information while she was alive. She chose to keep some things private, and I think we should respect her choices. So there is something. I'd said too much, revealed just enough to confirm his suspicions without actually providing any useful information. But the damage was done. Bradley now knew that there were aspects of Eleanor's estate that hadn't been disclosed to the family, and he would inevitably share that knowledge with our parents. "I have to go," I said. "I'll talk to you later." I hung up before he could ask more questions, but I knew the conversation had changed everything. The family conflict that Eleanor had anticipated and tried to prevent was now inevitable. My parents would escalate their investigation, potentially leading to legal challenges that could trigger the protection clause and destroy everything Eleanor had built at Riverside. That evening, I called Marcus Thompson again to discuss the implications of Bradley's call. "It sounds like you need to accelerate the transition timeline," he said after I'd explained the conversation. "If your family is planning legal challenges, it would be better for you to be fully established in your role at Riverside before those challenges begin." "What does that mean practically?" "It means we should schedule a special board meeting to formalize your ownership immediately, rather than waiting for the gradual transition Eleanor had planned. It means you should consider taking a leave of absence from your clinical practice to focus entirely on Riverside for the next several months. And it means you should prepare for the possibility that your family relationships will be permanently damaged when they learn the truth." The conversation was sobering but clarifying. I'd been hoping that I could manage both my clinical work and my new responsibilities at Riverside while maintaining some semblance of normal family relationships. But Bradley's call had made it clear that those hopes were unrealistic. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Dr. Valdez to discuss the possibility of taking a leave of absence from Northwest Mental Health Services. I couldn't explain the full situation, but I could be honest about having inherited family responsibilities that required my immediate attention. "This is very sudden," Dr. Valdez observed. "Is everything okay with your family situation?" "It's complicated," I replied. "I've inherited some responsibilities that are going to require more time and attention than I initially anticipated. I'm hoping the leave would be temporary, maybe 3 to 6 months, but I need to be honest that I'm not certain about the timeline." She studied my face carefully, probably trying to assess whether this request was related to the recent drug allegations or some other family crisis. "You know we value your work here tremendously," she said finally. "Your clients have excellent outcomes. Your colleagues respect you, and you've been a real asset to our program. If you need time to handle family obligations, we can certainly arrange a leave of absence." The conversation was easier than I'd expected, partly because Dr. Valdez had seen firsthand how destructive my family could be, and probably understood that whatever I was dealing with was serious enough to require my full attention. The hardest part was explaining the situation to my clients. Rebecca was scheduled to start at Riverside the following week, so I could frame my leave as temporary and ensure that she would have continuity of care upon her discharge. But several other clients would need to be transferred to other therapists, and I worried about the impact of that disruption on their progress. Lisa Chen was incredibly supportive when I explained that I needed to take time off for family responsibilities. "I hope you know you can talk to me if you need support," she said. "Whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to handle it alone." Her kindness made me wish I could be more honest about the situation, but I knew that sharing details about Riverside would be premature until I was more established in my role there. The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. James Kim arranged for the meeting to be held at Marcus Thompson's law office rather than at Riverside to maintain privacy in case my family was monitoring my activities. As I prepared for the meeting, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I'd been a clinical social worker with a difficult family and a modest inheritance from my grandmother. Now I was about to become the owner of a major addiction treatment center with millions of dollars in assets and the responsibility for hundreds of lives every year. The transition felt both overwhelming and inevitable. Eleanor had been preparing me for this role without my knowledge, observing my work and character for years before deciding that I was ready for the responsibility. Her confidence in me was both humbling and motivating. But I was also aware that the easy part was over. Taking ownership of Riverside would be challenging enough under normal circumstances. Doing it while navigating family conflict and potential legal challenges would require strength, wisdom, and support that I hoped I possessed. The night before the board meeting, I drove out to Eleanor's grave one more time. The cemetery was quiet in the evening light, and I sat beside her headstone, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. "I hope I'm ready for this," I said quietly. "I hope I can protect what you built and make it even better." As I sat there, I thought about all the people whose lives had been changed by Riverside over the past 15 years. People like Carlos, who'd gone from homelessness to stable employment and reunification with his children. Families who'd learned to heal together rather than continuing cycles of dysfunction and enabling. Staff members who'd found meaning and purpose in work that made a real difference. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. Eleanor had given me the chance to continue and expand work that saved lives and healed families. Whatever challenges lay ahead with my own family, I was determined to honor that gift and protect the legacy she'd entrusted to me. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but it would also bring the opportunity to step fully into the role Eleanor had been preparing me for all along. As I drove home, I thought about the transition ahead and the work that would soon become my life's mission. The board meeting would formalize my ownership, but the real work would be learning to lead an organization dedicated to healing and transformation. It was exactly the kind of work I'd always been called to do, just on a much larger scale than I'd ever imagined possible. The special board meeting convened at exactly 9 o'clock on Friday morning in Marcus Thompson's conference room. The formal transfer documents were spread across the mahogany table, each page marked with colored tabs indicating where my signature was required. Dr. Henley, Robert Chen, and Maria Santos sat on one side of the table, while James Kim and Dr. Martinez flanked me on the other side. Marcus presided from the head of the table, his demeanor serious but reassuring. "Today we officially transfer ownership of Riverside Recovery Institute and all associated assets to Chloe Rivers." Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of legal formality. Eleanor's instructions were very specific about this process, and were following her wishes exactly as she outlined them. He handed me the first document, a deed transfer that would make me the legal owner of the 50-acre property and all buildings. As I signed my name in blue ink, I thought about the hundreds of people who had found healing on this land, and the thousands more who would hopefully benefit from it in the years to come. The financial documents were more complex, transferring control of the foundation assets and establishing my authority to make budgetary decisions for the center's operations. The numbers were staggering when I saw them laid out in official legal language. Eleanor had created an endowment worth over $12 million, generating enough annual income to support high-quality programming regardless of fluctuations in insurance reimbursements or economic downturns. "Your grandmother was remarkably far-sighted," Dr. Henley observed as I worked through the paperwork. "She understood that addiction treatment is often the first thing cut when healthcare budgets get tight, so she wanted to ensure Riverside would never be vulnerable to those pressures." The final set of documents established my role as chair of the board of directors, with authority to hire and fire key personnel, approve major expenditures, and set strategic direction for the organization. It was a level of responsibility I'd never held before, but the other board members seemed confident in Eleanor's choice. "We're here to support you through this transition," Maria Santos said warmly. "Eleanor picked each of us specifically because she knew we shared her vision and values. You're not taking this on alone." After the paperwork was completed, James Kim presented me with a leather portfolio containing keys to every building on the property, security codes for the administrative systems, and contact information for all department heads and key staff members. The physical weight of the keys felt symbolic of the responsibility I was accepting. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, opening a final envelope that had been sealed with Eleanor's personal wax stamp. "She asked me to give you this after the ownership transfer was complete." Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a brief message in Eleanor's handwriting. "You are now responsible for continuing the most important work of my life. Trust your instincts, lead with compassion, and never forget that every person who walks through Riverside's doors is someone's beloved child. The foundation is strong, the team is excellent, and you have everything you need to succeed. Make it yours. Love, Nana." The note brought tears to my eyes, but also a sense of determination. Eleanor had spent 15 years building something extraordinary, and now it was my responsibility to protect it and help it grow. The meeting concluded with plans for my first official day as owner on Monday morning. James would arrange for me to meet individually with each department head over the course of the week. and Dr. Martinez would give me access to the clinical documentation systems so I could understand how treatment planning and outcome measurement worked at the operational level. As I drove back to Portland, my phone started buzzing with text messages from Bradley. The messages grew increasingly urgent and demanding as I ignored them, culminating in a final text that simply said, "Mom is hiring a lawyer Monday morning. Last chance to tell us the truth." I called Marcus immediately to report the threat. "This is exactly what Eleanor was afraid would happen," he said grimly. "But don't worry. The will is ironclad, and any challenge they attempt will only trigger the protection clause. They'll end up hurting themselves more than you. What should I do if they contact me directly? Refer them to me. Don't discuss the inheritance with them at all. Any communication about the will should go through legal channels from now on." That weekend, I spent my time reading through the operational manuals and policy documents that James had given me. Riverside operated with remarkable attention to detail and quality control. Every aspect of client care was documented and measured, from the initial assessment process through long-term follow-up after discharge. The client handbook was particularly impressive, written in clear, compassionate language that explained what people could expect during treatment and what would be expected of them. The emphasis was consistently on empowerment and healing, rather than punishment or control. Reading through it, I could see Eleanor's influence in every policy and procedure. Sunday evening brought an unwelcome surprise when my parents showed up at my apartment without warning. I heard the familiar sound of my mother's voice in the hallway, giving instructions to my father about which boxes to carry. Through the peephole, I could see them standing outside my door with what appeared to be several large shopping bags. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the security chain engaged. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "We brought you some things from Nana's house," Victoria said, holding up one of the bags. "Items that didn't get distributed to everyone else." The timing was suspicious, coming just days after Bradley's warning about their legal plans. I suspected this visit was actually an opportunity to search my apartment for evidence of hidden assets or documents related to Eleanor's estate. "You can leave them in the hallway," I said. "I'll bring them in later." "Don't be silly," Victoria replied, pushing against the door. "We need to come in and explain what everything is." "This isn't a good time," I said firmly. "I have plans this evening." My father stepped forward, his expression more aggressive than I'd ever seen it. "Chloe, we need to have a conversation about your attitude lately. You've been disrespectful and secretive, and we're concerned about what's going on with you." The accusation was rich, coming from people who had made false drug allegations to my employer, and were now apparently planning legal action against Eleanor's will. But I kept my voice calm and controlled. "I'm not being secretive. I'm being private, which is my right as an adult." "Not when it affects the family," Victoria snapped. "If Nana left you something that rightfully belongs to all of us, we have a right to know about it." There it was, the real reason for their visit. They weren't bringing me forgotten items from Eleanor's house. They were fishing for information about my inheritance and trying to establish some kind of claim to whatever I might have received. "Nana's will was very clear about her intentions," I said. "If you have questions about the estate, you should speak with her attorney." "We plan to," Robert said ominously, "but we thought you might want to avoid the embarrassment of a legal investigation by simply telling us the truth." The threat was explicit now. Cooperate with their demands or face legal consequences. It was the same pattern of manipulation they'd used throughout my childhood, escalated to include lawyers and formal challenges. "I have nothing to hide," I said calmly. "Feel free to contact Marcus Thompson if you want information about Nana's estate." I closed the door before they could respond, listening as they argued in the hallway about what to do next. Eventually, they left the bags outside my door and departed, but I knew the confrontation was just beginning. Monday morning, I drove to Riverside early, wanting to arrive before the staff started their day. The property looked different, knowing that I was now responsible for everything I could see. The maintenance crews were already working, ensuring that the grounds remained welcoming and beautiful for clients and families. The kitchen staff was preparing breakfast for the residential clients. The administrative team was opening the building and preparing for another day of admissions, assessments, and treatment planning. James Kim met me in what was now my office, a spacious room on the second floor with windows overlooking the river. Eleanor had rarely used the office during her visits, preferring to walk around the property and interact directly with staff and clients. But it had been maintained and furnished according to her instructions, ready for the day when I would need a private workspace. "How are you feeling about everything?" James asked as we reviewed the day's schedule. "Overwhelmed, but excited," I replied honestly. "It's surreal to think that I'm responsible for all of this, but I'm also eager to learn how everything works." The first department head meeting was with Linda Foster, the director of admissions. She'd been with Riverside for 6 years and had developed relationships with referral sources throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her office walls were covered with thank you cards from families and letters from clients describing how the admission process had made them feel welcomed and hopeful during their most vulnerable moments. "The key to our success is meeting people where they are," Linda explained as she walked me through the admission process. "Many people arrive here feeling ashamed, scared, and convinced they're hopeless cases. Our job is to help them understand that seeking treatment is a sign of strength, not weakness." She showed me the intake forms that had been designed to gather necessary clinical information while avoiding language that felt judgmental or invasive. The questions were comprehensive but compassionate, focusing on understanding each person's unique situation, rather than simply documenting their problems. Eleanor insisted that every person who called for information should feel heard and respected, regardless of whether they ultimately chose to enter treatment here. Linda continued. She understood that for many people, making that initial phone call is the hardest step in their recovery journey. The clinical team meeting was equally enlightening. Dr. Martinez had assembled a group of therapists, nurses, and support staff who clearly loved their work and believed deeply in the possibility of recovery for everyone. The staff meeting focused on 3 current clients who were struggling with different aspects of the program, and the discussion was remarkable for its creativity, compassion, and commitment to individualized care. "We have a client who's been here for 3 weeks but is still very resistant to group therapy," one of the therapists reported. "He participates in individual sessions and follows all the rules, but he won't engage with other clients." Rather than viewing this as a behavioral problem to be corrected, the team brainstormed ways to understand and address the underlying concerns. Maybe he'd had negative experiences with group settings in the past. Maybe he was dealing with trauma that made vulnerability feel dangerous. Maybe he learned better through one-on-one interactions and needed a different pathway to developing peer connections. "What matters is that he's here and he's sober," Dr. Martinez said. "We'll work with his strengths and meet him where he is, rather than trying to force him into a model that doesn't fit his needs." The afternoon brought meetings with the financial administrator, the facilities manager, and the director of the family program. Each conversation revealed new layers of complexity in running a high-quality treatment center, but also new appreciation for the thoughtfulness Eleanor had brought to every aspect of the operation. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The scope of the work was enormous, but it was also exactly the kind of work I felt called to do. Instead of helping one client at a time, I now had the opportunity to impact hundreds of lives through the programs and policies I would help shape. Tuesday morning brought the phone call I'd been expecting but dreading. Marcus Thompson called to inform me that my parents had indeed hired an attorney and were formally challenging Eleanor's will. "They're claiming that Eleanor was incompetent when she made her final revisions, and that you exercised undue influence over her decisions," Marcus explained. "It's a common strategy in estate disputes, but it won't succeed given the documentation we have." "What happens now?" "They'll file a petition with the probate court requesting a formal review of the will. We'll respond with evidence of Eleanor's competency and the legitimacy of her decisions. The process could take several months, but the outcome isn't in doubt. And the protection clause goes into effect immediately. The foundation assets are now frozen pending resolution of the challenge. If they persist with the lawsuit, the funding will be redirected to other organizations as Eleanor specified." Quote, "The irony was devastating. In their attempt to gain access to Eleanor's assets, My parents were ensuring that none of us would benefit from them. Their greed and entitlement would destroy exactly what they were trying to claim. I called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon to discuss the implications of the legal challenge. The board members were disappointed but not surprised by my family's actions. Eleanor anticipated this exact scenario, Dr. Henley said sadly. She hoped it wouldn't happen, but she was prepared for the possibility that your family would try to interfere with her wishes. What does this mean for Riverside's operations? I asked. In the short term, nothing changes, Robert Chen replied. We have enough operating reserves to continue normal programming for several months while the legal issues are resolved. But if the challenge continues, we'll eventually need to start making difficult decisions about program cuts and staff reductions. The thought of reducing services because of my family's legal maneuvering was infuriating. People who needed treatment would suffer because my parents couldn't accept that Eleanor had made independent decisions about her own assets. How long could this legal process take? Maria Santos asked. Months, possibly longer if they appeal, Marcus replied. The good news is that their case is weak and will ultimately fail. The bad news is that the protection clause doesn't distinguish between successful and unsuccessful challenges. Any formal legal action triggers the redirection of assets. As the meeting concluded, I felt the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on my shoulders. Not only was I learning to lead a complex organization, I was doing it while navigating a legal battle that could destroy everything Eleanor had built. That evening, I received a call from an unexpected source. Rebecca, the client I'd referred to Riverside, was calling from the facility to thank me for the referral and share her progress in treatment. I know you're not supposed to call your old therapist while you're in residential, she said, but Dr. Martinez said it would be okay to update you on how things are going. Hearing her voice brought a mix of emotions. Professional pride in seeing a client succeed, personal satisfaction in knowing that the referral had been appropriate, and the strange complexity of knowing that she was now being treated at a facility I owned. How has the experience been? I asked. Life-changing, she said without hesitation. The family therapy has been incredibly hard, but my kids are starting to understand that my addiction was a disease, not a choice. And I'm learning tools for managing stress and emotions that I never had before. I'm so glad to hear that. There's something else, she continued. I wanted to thank you for helping me see that I was worthy of comprehensive treatment. For years, I thought I just needed to try harder or want sobriety more, but being here has shown me that recovery requires support, education, and healing that I couldn't do on my own. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the conversation and its implications. Rebecca was succeeding at Riverside because Eleanor had created a place where people could access the level of care they needed, regardless of their ability to pay full market rates. If the legal challenge succeeded in redirecting the foundation assets, places like Riverside would become increasingly rare, available only to people with excellent insurance or significant personal wealth. Wednesday brought another complication when Dr. Valdez called to check on my leave of absence and ask when I might be ready to return to Northwest Mental Health Services. I know you said 3 to 6 months, she said, but I wanted to touch base and see how you're doing with whatever family situation you're managing. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being unable to provide specific information about my circumstances while needing to communicate that my leave might be longer than originally anticipated. The situation has become more complex than I initially expected, I said carefully. I may need additional time to resolve everything properly. Chloe, I need to ask directly. Are you dealing with legal issues related to the drug allegations your mother made? The question caught me off guard, but it also provided an opportunity to be more honest about part of my situation. There are legal issues involved, but they're related to my grandmother's estate rather than anything connected to my work or the drug allegations. I see. Well, your position will be held for up to a year under our family leave policies. But I do need to know if you're planning to return at all, or if this represents a permanent career change. The question forced me to confront a decision I'd been avoiding. Could I realistically return to clinical practice while also running Riverside? Did I want to? Was my calling now to help individuals one at a time, or to impact hundreds of people through organizational leadership? I honestly don't know yet, I replied. The family responsibilities I've inherited are significant, and I'm still figuring out how to balance everything. Take the time you need, Dr. Valdez said kindly, but know that we'd love to have you back when you're ready. Thursday's staff meeting at Riverside provided a welcome distraction from the legal complexities I was navigating. Dr. Martinez had invited me to participate in the weekly clinical review, where the treatment team discussed progress and challenges for current clients. The case that captured my attention involved a young man named Derek, who was struggling with heroin addiction complicated by severe depression and anxiety. He'd been through multiple treatment programs without success, and his family had essentially given up hope that he would ever achieve lasting sobriety. Derek is incredibly bright and insightful, his primary therapist reported. He understands his addiction intellectually and can articulate sophisticated recovery concepts, but he's never been able to translate that understanding into sustained behavioral change. What's different about his experience here? I asked. For the first time, he's receiving integrated treatment for both his addiction and his mental health conditions, Dr. Martinez explained. Previous programs focused only on the substance use and ignored the underlying depression and anxiety that were driving his drug use. He's also responding well to the vocational training component, another staff member added. He's working in our computer lab helping other clients with technology skills, and it's giving him a sense of purpose and competence he's never had before. The discussion continued for another hour, covering Derek's family dynamics, his response to different therapeutic approaches, and plans for transitional support when he eventually completed the residential program. What struck me most was the team's commitment to understanding Derek as a whole person rather than simply addressing his symptoms. This is exactly what Eleanor envisioned, Dr. Martinez said as the meeting concluded. Comprehensive, individualized care that addresses all the factors contributing to someone's addiction. Friday brought news that the legal challenge was proceeding as expected. My parents' attorney had filed all the necessary paperwork, and Marcus was preparing our response. The process would be lengthy and expensive, but the outcome was not in doubt. The good news is that your family's attorney is not particularly experienced in estate law, Marcus reported. Their arguments are poorly constructed, and their evidence is non-existent. This should be resolved relatively quickly once it gets before a judge. And if they appeal, they'll lose again, but it will take longer and cost more money. Eleanor included provisions to cover all legal expenses related to defending the will, so you won't be financially responsible for this process. As my first week as owner of Riverside concluded, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in such a short period. A month ago, I'd been a clinical social worker dealing with difficult family dynamics. Now I was responsible for a multi-million-dollar organization while defending my inheritance in court. But I was also more convinced than ever that Eleanor had made the right choice in leaving Riverside to me. The work being done there was extraordinary, and the opportunity to expand and improve it was exactly the kind of challenge I felt prepared to tackle. Saturday morning, I drove to the cemetery to visit Eleanor's grave and update her on the week's developments. The legal challenge would have frustrated and disappointed her, but I didn't think it would have surprised her. She'd built protections into the will precisely because she'd anticipated this kind of family reaction. "I'm doing my best to honor what you created," I said quietly. "The team is amazing, the work is important, and I'm learning something new every day. I just hope I can protect it from the family drama you were worried about." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and I felt a sense of determination settling over me. Eleanor had given me the tools and resources I needed to succeed. Now it was up to me to use them wisely and protect the legacy she'd entrusted to my care. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a small bouquet of flowers that someone had placed by Eleanor's headstone. The card attached was from someone named Patricia, thanking Eleanor for giving my son his life back, and noting that he'd just celebrated 1 year of sobriety after completing treatment at Riverside. The card reminded me why this work mattered so much, and why Eleanor had been willing to dedicate 15 years of her life to supporting it. Every person who found recovery at Riverside represented a family healed, a life restored, a future reclaimed. That impact was worth protecting, regardless of what legal challenges lay ahead. The drive back to Portland gave me time to think about the week ahead and the decisions I would need to make about Riverside's future. The legal challenge would eventually be resolved in my favor, but it might take months. In the meantime, I needed to ensure that the high-quality programming continued and that staff morale remained strong despite the uncertainty. I also needed to start thinking about my own long-term vision for Riverside. Eleanor had created something extraordinary, but she'd also given me the freedom to build on her foundation and make it even better. The question was what improvements and expansions would best serve the people who needed our help. 3 months into the legal battle, the momentum shifted dramatically in our favor. Marcus Thompson called on a rainy Thursday morning with news that would change everything. Their attorney has filed a motion to withdraw from the case. Quote, he announced, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. Apparently, your parents have been unable to produce any credible evidence to support their claims, and their lawyer doesn't want to risk sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. I set down my coffee cup in the Riverside break room where I'd been reviewing the morning's admission reports. Around me, the normal sounds of a treatment center starting its day continued. Clients heading to group therapy sessions, staff members coordinating care plans, the gentle hum of an organization dedicated to healing. What does that mean for the case? It means they have 30 days to find new representation or withdraw their challenge entirely. Most attorneys who specialize in estate law will review their documentation and reach the same conclusion. The case has no merit. The relief was overwhelming, but I'd learned not to celebrate too early where my family was concerned. And if they do find someone willing to take the case, then we proceed to court, present Eleanor's medical evaluations and the testimony of the witnesses who can attest to her mental competency and win decisively. But honestly, I don't think it will get that far. After hanging up, I walked through the facility that had become both my responsibility and my sanctuary over the past few months. The morning light streamed through the large windows of the main building, illuminating the comfortable seating areas where families gathered for visiting hours and clients met with their individual therapists. In the 3 months since taking over Riverside, I'd learned that running a treatment center was like conducting an orchestra. Every department had to work in harmony for the music to be beautiful. The clinical team provided the melody of healing and growth. The administrative staff kept the rhythm, ensuring that insurance authorizations, admissions, and discharge planning flowed smoothly. The facilities team provided the foundation, maintaining an environment that felt safe and welcoming. Derek, the young man who'd been struggling with integrated treatment for addiction and mental health issues, was approaching his graduation from the residential program. His transformation had been remarkable to witness. The combination of evidence-based addiction treatment, psychiatric medication management, and vocational training had given him tools he'd never possessed in previous treatment attempts. He's like a different person, his mother had told me during a recent family therapy session I'd observed. For the first time in years, when I look at him, I see my son instead of his addiction. Derek's success wasn't unique. The outcomes data I reviewed each month showed consistently strong results across all the metrics that mattered. Completion rates remained well above national averages. Client satisfaction scores consistently exceeded industry benchmarks. Most importantly, the long-term sobriety rates for Riverside graduates continued to outperform comparable facilities. But the legal challenge had created operational stress that went beyond financial concerns. Staff members were worried about job security. Clients and families were asking questions about the center's stability. Referral sources were beginning to hedge their bets, sending some clients to other facilities just in case Riverside's funding disappeared. Dr. Martinez had been particularly concerned about the impact on staff morale. People who work in addiction treatment don't do it for the money, she'd told me during one of our weekly leadership meetings. They do it because they believe in the mission. When that mission feels threatened, it affects everything about how they approach their work. I'd spent considerable time over the past month meeting individually with key staff members to reassure them about Riverside's future and to gather their input on potential improvements and expansions. Their insights had been invaluable, and their commitment to the work had been inspiring. Linda Foster, the admissions director, had proposed expanding outreach to rural communities where addiction treatment resources were severely limited. We have people driving 3 hours to get here because there's nothing closer to home, she'd explained. Eleanor always talked about accessibility, and I think she'd want us to find ways to serve people who can't easily travel to our main facility. James Kim had been researching the feasibility of adding a specialized track for healthcare professionals struggling with addiction. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, they have unique needs because of licensing issues and career concerns. He'd observed, there are only a few programs in the country that really understand how to help healthcare professionals maintain their careers while getting the treatment they need. These conversations had sparked ideas for how Riverside could grow and evolve, while maintaining the quality and values Eleanor had established. But all of those plans remained on hold while the legal challenge continued to freeze our foundation assets. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Rebecca, who had successfully completed residential treatment and was now in the outpatient phase of her recovery, had requested a meeting to thank me personally for the referral that had changed her life. "I need you to understand something," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "When I first called Riverside, I was maybe 48 hours away from giving up entirely. I'd tried outpatient treatment twice, and nothing had stuck. My kids weren't speaking to me, I'd lost my job, and I honestly thought I was beyond help." I listened as she described her experience at Riverside, from the compassionate admission process through the comprehensive family therapy that had begun healing relationships she'd thought were permanently damaged. "My daughter spoke to me yesterday for the first time in 8 months, Rebecca continued, tears in her eyes. "Not because she was angry or needed something, but because she wanted to tell me about a boy she likes at school. She said she felt safe talking to me again." Stories like Rebecca's reminded me why Eleanor had been willing to dedicate so much of her wealth and energy to supporting addiction treatment. Every person who found recovery represented ripple effects that extended far beyond the individual. Children who got their parents back, spouses who could rebuild marriages, employers who regained valuable employees, communities that were safer and stronger. "There's something else I want to say," Rebecca added. "I know that places like this don't just exist by magic. Someone has to fund them, support them, make sure they have the resources to do good work. I don't know who's responsible for Riverside, but I hope they understand how many lives they're saving." The irony of her comment wasn't lost on me. She was thanking the anonymous benefactor who had made her treatment possible, not knowing that she was sitting across from that person. But her words reinforced my determination to protect Eleanor's legacy and ensure that future clients would have access to the same quality of care that had transformed Rebecca's life. That afternoon brought news that accelerated the resolution of the legal challenge. Marcus called to report that my parents had been unable to find any attorney willing to take their case on its merits. The 3 firms they contacted all reached the same conclusion, he explained. "The evidence of Eleanor's competency is overwhelming, and there's no indication whatsoever of undue influence. No reputable attorney wants to put their name on a case they're guaranteed to lose. So what happens now? They have 2 options. They can represent themselves in court, which would be professional suicide, or they can withdraw their challenge and accept Eleanor's wishes as stated in the will." The prospect of my parents representing themselves in a complex estate case was almost absurd enough to be amusing. Neither of them had any legal training, and their understanding of probate law was limited to whatever they'd learned from television dramas. How long do they have to decide? The court has given them until next Friday to either file proof of new representation or formally withdraw their challenge. Next Friday was exactly 1 week away. After months of uncertainty, we were finally approaching resolution of the legal battle that had consumed so much time and energy. That evening, I drove to Eleanor's favorite restaurant in downtown Portland, a small Italian place where she'd taken me for dinner on my birthday every year since I'd moved to the city. The owner, Mrs. Castellano, recognized me immediately and asked how I was doing since Eleanor's passing. "She was so proud of you," Mrs. Castellano said as she seated me at the corner table where Eleanor and I had always sat. "Every time she came in, she talked about your work helping people with addiction problems. She said you had found your calling." Over dinner, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been a clinical social worker with a difficult family and a modest inheritance from my grandmother. Now I was the owner of a respected treatment center, with the resources to expand services and help even more people find recovery. The transformation hadn't been easy. Learning to lead an organization was vastly different from providing individual therapy. Managing budgets, staff relationships, regulatory compliance, and strategic planning required skills I was still developing. But I discovered that I loved the complexity and the opportunity to impact systems rather than just individuals. The legal challenge had also clarified something important about my family relationships. My parents' willingness to destroy Eleanor's legacy in pursuit of money they felt entitled to had revealed the depth of their selfishness and dysfunction. There was no going back to pretending we had a normal family relationship after what they'd attempted to do. Bradley had called twice since the legal challenge began, both times trying to convince me to settle out of court by sharing some portion of the inheritance with the rest of the family. Each conversation had reinforced my understanding that he viewed Eleanor's assets as family property that should be distributed according to his sense of fairness, rather than her explicit wishes. Nana wouldn't have wanted the family to be torn apart over money, he'd argued during our last conversation. You're right, I'd replied, which is why she included a protection clause to prevent exactly what you and our parents are doing. The irony seemed lost on him that their legal challenge was the cause of family division, not my inheritance. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Oregon. I was in my office at Riverside reviewing proposals for the specialized healthcare professional track that James had been researching when Marcus called, with the news I'd been waiting for. They withdrew the challenge, quote, he announced, filed the paperwork an hour ago. The legal battle is officially over. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. For months, the threat of losing the foundation assets had hung over every decision I made about Riverside's future. Now that cloud had finally lifted. What happens to the foundation assets now? They're released from the freeze immediately. You have full access to the endowment and can proceed with any expansion plans you've been developing. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my office for a few minutes, absorbing the significance of what had just happened. Eleanor's vision was safe. Riverside's future was secure. The work that had transformed hundreds of lives could continue and grow. I called an all-staff meeting for that afternoon to share the news and discuss plans for moving forward. The relief and excitement in the room was palpable as I explained that the legal challenge had been withdrawn and that we could now proceed with confidence about our long-term stability. Eleanor built something extraordinary here, I told the assembled staff members. Our job now is to honor her legacy while also making Riverside even better at helping people heal and rebuild their lives. Dr. Martinez raised her hand. What does this mean for the expansion ideas we've been discussing? It means we can start turning those ideas into reality, I replied. I want to establish a planning committee to develop proposals for the rural outreach program, the healthcare professional track, and any other innovations that could improve our impact. The energy in the room was electric. Staff members who had been worried about job security were now excited about opportunities to expand their work and help even more people. It was exactly the kind of transformation Eleanor would have wanted to see. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into strategic planning for Riverside's future. The foundation assets provided resources for significant expansion, but I wanted to ensure that any growth happened thoughtfully and maintained the quality standards Eleanor had established. The rural outreach program became my first priority. Oregon had vast rural areas where people struggling with addiction had limited treatment options. Riverside could establish satellite clinics in partnership with rural hospitals and community health centers, providing intensive outpatient services to people who couldn't travel to the main facility. The healthcare professional program was equally exciting. Dr. Martinez had identified a consultant who specialized in designing treatment programs for physicians, nurses, and other healthcare workers. The unique challenges faced by healthcare professionals required specialized approaches that addressed licensing concerns, career rehabilitation, and the particular stresses of medical careers. I also wanted to expand the family programming that had been so successful for clients like Rebecca. Eleanor had understood that addiction affected entire family systems, and recovery needed to happen at the family level rather than just the individual level. Additional family therapy staff and specialized programming for children and adolescents could help more families heal together. As December arrived, I found myself reflecting on the year that had transformed my life so completely. The false drug allegations that had started this journey seemed like something from a different lifetime. My family's legal challenge had ultimately strengthened my resolve and clarified my priorities in ways I hadn't expected. Rebecca graduated from the outpatient program just before Christmas, and she asked if I would attend her graduation ceremony. Watching her receive her completion certificate while her children and mother applauded from the audience was one of the most meaningful moments of my new role as Riverside's owner. When I first came here, I thought recovery meant just not drinking, Rebecca said during her graduation speech. But this place taught me that recovery means rebuilding every part of my life: my relationships, my career, my sense of myself as a mother and a human being. I'm not the same person who walked through those doors 8 months ago. After the ceremony, Rebecca's daughter approached me with a card she'd made. Inside, in careful 10-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for helping my mom come back to us." That evening, I drove to the cemetery to visit Eleanor's grave and share the news about Rebecca's graduation and the other developments at Riverside. The winter air was crisp and clear, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. "The legal challenge is over," I told her quietly. "Bradley and our parents finally withdrew their case. The foundation is safe, and we can move forward with all the expansion plans we've been developing." I pulled out a folder containing the preliminary proposals for the Rural Outreach Program and the Healthcare Professional Track. "I think you'd be excited about these ideas. We're going to be able to help so many more people, and we're going to do it the right way, with the same values and quality you insisted on." The wind rustled through the bare branches overhead, and I felt a sense of peace and purpose that had been missing during the months of legal uncertainty. Eleanor had given me not just an inheritance, but a mission. Not just resources, but a responsibility. As I prepared to leave, I noticed that someone had placed fresh flowers on Eleanor's grave. The card was from Derek, the young man who'd struggled with integrated treatment for addiction and mental health issues. "Thank you for making a place where broken people can become whole again," he'd written. 6 months sober and working as a peer counselor. "You saved my life." Messages like Derek's arrived regularly at Riverside. Thank you cards from graduates, letters from family members, updates from people who were building new lives in recovery. Each one reminded me why Eleanor had been willing to dedicate so much of her wealth to supporting this work. The drive back to Portland gave me time to think about the year ahead and the opportunities it would bring. The Rural Outreach Program could launch by summer if the planning process went smoothly. The Healthcare Professional Track could begin accepting clients by fall. The expanded family programming could start immediately with additional staff hiring. But beyond the specific programs and services, I was excited about the opportunity to build on Eleanor's legacy while making Riverside my own. She'd created the foundation, but the future would reflect my vision and values as well as hers. As I reached the city limits, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard about your inheritance. Congratulations on getting everything you wanted. Hope it was worth destroying the family." The message was from Bradley, using a number I didn't recognize. I deleted the message without responding. The family destruction he was referring to had been caused by their own greed and entitlement, not by Eleanor's decision to leave her assets to someone who shared her values and commitment to helping others. If they'd accepted her wishes with grace and respect, our relationships could have remained intact. But their reaction had also revealed truths about their character that I'd been avoiding for years. The false drug allegations, the legal challenge, the threats and manipulation, all of it had shown me who they really were when their sense of entitlement was threatened. Eleanor had seen it clearly, which was why she'd included protection clauses in her will. That night, I sat in my apartment reading through thank you letters from Riverside graduates and their families. Story after story of lives transformed, relationships healed, futures reclaimed. A father who'd reconciled with his adult children after completing treatment. A teacher who'd returned to her classroom after addressing her prescription drug addiction. A veteran who'd found purpose and community after struggling with PTSD and alcohol abuse. Each letter reinforced my conviction that Eleanor had made the right choice in entrusting Riverside to my care. The work being done there was literally saving lives and rebuilding families. It was exactly the kind of meaningful impact I'd always wanted to make in the world, just on a scale I'd never imagined possible. As the year came to a close, I found myself grateful for every twist and turn of the journey that had brought me to this point. My parents' false drug allegations had forced me to take a leave of absence that allowed me to focus on learning about Riverside. Their legal challenge had strengthened my resolve and clarified my priorities. Even the family dysfunction that had caused so much pain throughout my life had prepared me to understand and address complex systems issues. Eleanor had left me more than a treatment center and a foundation. She'd given me a purpose that aligned perfectly with my skills, values, and calling. The work ahead would be challenging, but it would also be the most meaningful work I could imagine. On New Year's Eve, I stood on the deck of my apartment overlooking the lights of Portland and thought about the year to come. Somewhere out there were people who would find their way to Riverside in the months ahead. People like Rebecca and Derek who needed comprehensive, compassionate treatment to reclaim their lives. Families who needed support and education to heal together. Communities that would be stronger and safer because of the work we were doing. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. Eleanor had spent 15 years quietly building something extraordinary. Now it was my turn to protect it, expand it, and ensure that her vision of accessible, high-quality addiction treatment continued to change lives for generations to come. As midnight approached and fireworks began lighting up the sky, I made a resolution that would guide everything I did in the year ahead. I would honor Eleanor's legacy by making Riverside the best addiction treatment center in the country. I would expand services to reach more people who needed help. And I would never forget that every person who walked through our doors was someone's beloved child, deserving of compassion, respect, and the chance to rebuild their life. The year ahead would bring new challenges and opportunities, but I was ready for all of it. Eleanor had given me the tools and resources I needed to succeed. Now it was time to build something even better than what she'd created, something that would continue changing lives long after I was gone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.